Hello and welcome to episode 2 of On the Cube Leadership Podcast. We were with myself, Craig O'Sullivan, and Dr. Rod St. Hill, the business pastor. Hi, Dr. Rod. Welcome back.
It's great to be with you again, Craig.
Awesome. And look, as we did last week and we will be doing every week, we will be looking at a few key events that have happened in pop culture, in the political realm, in the business realm, in the ministry realm, and also looking at the Bible on how we can draw metaphors from those events to become better leaders. And last week tended to be, we never planned for it, but it tended to have a bit of a theme. And so this week ended up having a bit of a theme as well. And the main overall theme we're going to be looking at today is the exit. That's right. Like, there is always so much awkwardness around people exiting, people being fired, business partnerships breaking up, leadership leaving either in business or in ministry or in the church or whatever. Like, it's awkward, but there's a lot of lessons we can learn to actually do it well. It doesn't have to be awkward. And so we're going to be looking at a few of those points today. But before we get into that, Dr. Rod, have you ever experienced, let's say, an awkward exit?
Look, I haven't myself. All of my exits have been pretty happy ones, actually. And I've been moving on to something different that I believe the Lord has led me to. But I have been in situations where others have left badly. And it can be very difficult, not only for the person who leaves, but also for the others who don't. And, you talked about things like redundancies and so on. That can have a significant impact on morale of those who are left behind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It does. It seems awkward for everyone. And I suppose there's a number of different examples that we're actually going to talk about today and highlight maybe some key areas in different of these stories to be able to learn better. Look, I'll admit, like, I've been on, I would say, the receiving end of poor exits at times. And I suppose that was actually part of one of a determining factor of On Purpose Cubed, our leadership development program that we've launched. Is we're on a mission to eradicate poor leadership, and because we see so much of it, and there's so much awkwardness about it, and people are leaving because of poor leadership, and they're hurt and feel unfulfilled or whatever. But also, I actually feel like there's a lot of, let's call them exits, that are perceived incorrectly. And I suppose that's what we want to shed a light on today as well. And as I share in my program, in our leadership program, we never want to actually talk about the specific situations because I don't want to point fingers at anyone. I don't blame anyone. I don't hold any remorse for anyone or anything like that. So any bad experience that I've had with bad exits in the past, I just chalk them up to lessons and I don't hold anything against them. So we encourage you, as we're talking about these poor exits, I'm sure you can think of some bad exits that you have been a part of, maybe been responsible for, or maybe even been on the receiving end of. But today we want to emphasize love, right? We want to emphasize love and care. This is becoming a better leader is actually more about looking at ourselves at how we can become better, not necessarily pointing the finger at what other people did wrong. So I don't want you to use this as an excuse to grab your pitchforks and torches and go raging against whoever it was that you may have been involved with a bad exit. But we just want to encourage you to learn something that you can help become a better leader with that. And on that, let's get into the first topic. In pop culture, there's one person that is glaringly, let's say, very, very public right now, and kind of very public for their let's say, poor exit, and that is Meghan Markle. Yes, the Duchess of Sussex and obviously Prince Harry. They exited the royal family, and there seems to have been nothing but controversy since. the interview that she had with Oprah and just bagging on her experience with the royal family. Then, talking poorly about the way that her kids have been treated, and since with some other articles and everything that had come to light, and her trying to bring fame to herself by talking down about her, about the royal family. I think the point that I want to jump on here, Dr. Rod, is when we leave, obviously we left or we were forced out because there was a problem, right? Usually. And it can be very, very easy for us to harbor, I suppose, regret and remorse and everything like that, and want to lash out at the other people. What do you think it is that actually causes people after these exits to be these like big, I suppose, cat fights and kind of slinging of mud towards everyone? What's the actual cause of that, do you feel?
Well, look, it's always hard to put your finger on it in particular cases, but often I think we're really trying to justify our exit, or if not justifying our exit, we're trying to defend why we shouldn't have been forced into that exit. And look, in the case of Meghan Markle, I think there might have been an issue of unmet expectations or expectations that didn't turn out. And I think it actually points to something which is really important in leadership, and that is to make sure that when you take people on board, make sure that there's a match of expectations. It seems to me that there was a mismatch here, because most of what Meghan Markle has said publicly about her experience indicates that her expectations weren't met, and that eventually that prompted this parting of the ways between her and the rest of the royal family. So it seems to me that the job didn't turn out to be what she thought it was going to be like. And of course, that produces all kinds of stresses and tensions. And then naturally, we don't want to admit that we made a mistake. And so often our behavior can be of a nature of self-justifying.
Self-justifying. As soon as you said that, I'm like, yeah, if I've ever exited a place, whether good or bad, not just talking about the bad experiences, but when you end something, let's say when you're transitioning rather than ending something, you're transitioning from one season to another, there is always a little bit of doubt and a little bit of questioning of your own self-worth and your own, am I making the right decision? And so there is a sense of trying to prove it to ourselves and trying to prove it to other people that we made the right decision or that we were in the right. And I think that comes down to your worth, your value. What would you say to someone that is in that transition period? What would you say to them to maintain their confidence in themselves?
Oh, well, you do have to have a certain amount of, I guess, a self-image, a good self-image, which isn't actually dependent upon your work circumstances or whatever circumstances you're in. So we need, in any case, to develop a healthy self-image. And of course, I think one of the great advantages that we have as Christians is that we know we are valued by God. And ultimately, that's what really, really matters, so that we have a very strong foundation there. I think it's quite dangerous if our self-image is actually based on our performance or our position or our power, because every one of those is pretty unreliable and often dependent upon other people. And so I think we need to work on building our self-image. For me as a Christian, that's based fair and square on my relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So knowing him is the foundation of my own self-image. And quite frankly, if my self-image was based on my work performance, I would probably not be the kind of person that I am, because I know that I've not met my own expectations and on occasions the expectations of others in my work situations.
Yeah, for me, making sure I maintain my, my value or my self-worth, I think comes back to purpose. Is
indeed.
something that's helped me through those transitions, whether it be good transitions, bad transitions, whatever. One thing that's really given me strength is having a clear understanding of my overall purpose, yes, but also just believing and having faith that God has purpose in that moment, right? Even though it may not be, as Joseph said, what you meant for harm, God used for good, right? Like it not necessarily did God put me in that situation in that bad situation, but you know what? That situation, God will always and has always in every situation. Yes, it's been hard in the moment, but then when you're out of it and later on down the track, 6, 12, 24 months down the track, you look back and you're like, wow, I could see God moving his chess pieces along the way. Maybe he needed me over here instead of there, or something was like, it's just, I think that for me, coming back to purpose is knowing what I'm called to so that I know that my value is, like you say, not in my performance, but in the pursuit of that purpose. One thing I love that you said there was in relationship with God, because it's a journey. Purpose is that journey in relationship, continual relationship with God. I think that's part of the key that has carried me through. But I want to jump back to what you said about expectations, because I believe that unmet expectations is probably a big cause of poor leadership, and from both ends, right? So me as a leader, if I have unmet expectations of the person I'm leading, obviously I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to be upset, and there's going to be some tension. Same as a staff member or a volunteer in church or someone that's being led by someone else. We usually come into that leadership relationship with, let's be honest, sometimes way unrealistic expectations, because we almost over-glorify the person that we're about to follow, especially in the church realm. We kind of over-idolize, I suppose, the pastor or whatever. And then as soon as the pastor does something that doesn't meet our ridiculously high expectations of that pastor, then all of a sudden, we're disappointed, we're hurt by that person, the pastor or whatever. What would you say? How do you manage the people you lead having an unrealistic expectation of your superhuman ability? Because obviously I sing your praises all the time. You're one of the wisest men I know. You have a laundry list full of qualifications and achievements and everything like that, and probably achieved more in your life than, I suppose, 100 men put together almost. And that's the way that I always speak you up, because that's the way that I look up to you. But how would you manage someone that you're leading, someone that you're pastoring and everything like that? How would you manage their expectations?
Well, I think probably two ways. The first is to make it very clear what are your expectations of that person. So if it's somebody whom you're employing, or perhaps is in a volunteer position, as is often the case in the church world, you do need to make it very clear what are your expectations of that person. But I think the other thing too is we have to make sure that we don't hide our humanness, I should say. In other words, we need to be quite open about the fact that we don't actually have all the wisdom, and that we do actually make mistakes. And I think one way in which we can convey that to people is by sharing anecdotes. telling stories about your own experience, and also inviting input regularly so that people don't go away with the impression that, well, the only person God speaks to around here is Pastor Rod. He gets the vision, he gets the strategy, he gets everything. And so all my job is to just follow him. I think we need to be very careful about how we manage that whole culture of what you might loosely call fellowship. So make sure that your expectations of others are very clear, but also be certain that you don't inadvertently reinforce those wrong expectations that people might have of your wisdom, or, the fact that you don't make mistakes. And as I say, just share some anecdotes. I've made some mistakes. And the one thing I always say about my mistakes is I use them as learning opportunities. And that's a great habit to develop in everybody.
So let me go on that point then. I feel like you've opened up the floor. I would say that one of my biggest mistakes that I have made in my responsibility towards contributing to poor exits or whatever is one of my biggest gifts is also one of my biggest challenges is the fact that I'm an all-in type of person, and I throw my everything into. And so when I partner with someone or follow someone or whatever the situation has been, I've always thrown everything in. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is my everything and this is going to be my forever. Like that's kind of the way that I am. And I remember back when I had, I felt God called me to give him 12 months, a sabbatical, gave up an engagement, gave up my home, came and lived with you rent free. Thank you very much. And just volunteered in the church. And I know God was calling me to give him 12 months of just volunteer and just spending time with him. I went all in and tried to create a career out of it. And it was like, this is my forever now. And God had to kind of pull the rug out from underneath me to leave. And I know that that's like looking back on my past. I know that that's been one of my big mistakes of that expectation that I have is I'm like, I'm all in and this is forever, but maybe it's not. Maybe this is just the next season and God has me then wants to transition me to somewhere else. And that's one big lesson that I've learned. Now, I want to kind of transition into the next topic because we're talking about expectations, and I think it's a great segue into the next topic of, yes, let's get a little political and let's talk about the Donald. Yes, Donald Trump. We couldn't go too long without talking about Donald Trump. Hey, look, let me mention once again, this is like our little disclaimer. We are not political commentators. We are not experts on these situations or anything like that. We simply see everyday situations and draw metaphors from them. We like to take lessons and learnings from everyday events. So we may not know all the details. We also don't know outcomes yet. But a few weeks ago at the time of this recording, Trump's, country club or his house at his country club, whatever it is there at Mar-a-Lago was raided by the FBI. And there's all this controversy of Trump taking classified documents. And I was wondering, like, how can we talk about this? How can we learn without it being too political? And I really felt that this is actually a challenge that a lot of people, especially people that are hired for, how would I say it? Let's say more thinking roles, right? That they're people that are employed for their brains rather than their hands, so to speak, right? And not that people that work with their hands don't use their brains. I know that they use them a lot better than what I could. But people that are employed more for their thoughts rather than what they're working on, and there can be quite a complication of what belongs to me and what belongs to the company, right? Intellectual property. It's a big challenge. Because we can go and we can create something, and under the letter of the law, if we have been employed by an organization, then technically whatever we create with that organization belongs to them. Obviously, there is precedence for the president to be able to take some of their documents and stuff like that. There's also apparently this precedent that says that the Trump can declassify something in a moment, and that sounds all crazy. But anyway, but there's all this drama of Trump now leaving, causing all this drama because he's taken stuff that he believes belongs to him, but the government believes still belongs to the White House. Dr. Rod, what would you say to a leader that is creating things and developing things in an organization, in a partnership or whatever, but upon exit, they feel like there's some value that they can take? What would your advice be to them?
Well, first of all, find out what authority you have to do it. So make sure you know. And look, for many people, that's going to be in their contract. A lot of organisations will actually have policies on intellectual property. I've spent a long time in the university sector. Every university I've worked in had a policy on intellectual property and also on copyright. And there are all sorts of eventualities which were anticipated in those policies. And there are opportunities from time to time to negotiate with your university in terms of sharing the proceeds of royalties on inventions and so on. So know what the policy is, know what your contract says. That's really important, I believe, because if you didn't like your contract or if you didn't like the policy in the first place, you shouldn't have joined that organisation anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is be tidy. Make sure that on exit, everything is tidy.
That's
and that
good.
you don't have boxes and boxes of records which you may be entitled to or you may not be entitled to. And I think one of the issues that has dogged President Trump, of course, is that perhaps he didn't leave the White House as tidily as he could have. But
I don't think he did anything as tidily as you could. Did he? he likes to create a little bit of chaos around him.
You just need to be, So I would say, and perhaps, in his case, he wasn't actually expecting to have to leave the White House as soon as he did. And maybe, things weren't as carefully sorted as they ought to have been. That's just abstracting altogether from whatever political overtones there might be in terms of that raid. But look, the general advice I would give is make sure you know what you are allowed to take with you upon exit, and do everything you possibly can to make sure that it is a physically tidy exit.
That's really good. Now, it was really good. Obviously, your history is in universities, and as a lecturer in universities, as a dean, as a vice president, as well as a CEO of like higher education institutions, you've been in every gamut of higher education institutions. You have obviously developed a lot of knowledge, during that time, and you did your research and you prepared for lectures and stuff like that, presented courses and lessons and stuff. And it's very similar to obviously, I'm a teacher and very very similar. I create content, research, and create educational material and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, like you mentioned, when you create, I'm assuming when you create lectures and everything like that, they are fully the asset of the university, but you're still got your knowledge and you've created models and things like that. How do you, with integrity, take the knowledge that you have, because obviously it's your knowledge, you can't get rid of it. How do you separate and do it with integrity of taking the knowledge that you have and the things you've developed, I suppose the concepts you've developed, but still leaving the assets that do actually belong to that organisation?
Well, look, one of the easy ways, of course, you're still carrying around all that knowledge in your head. That's what we economists call intellectual capital. You've still got that. And more than likely, your next employer is employing you partly because of that intellectual capital or human capital that is part of who you are. But what you wouldn't do, of course, is to take with you any of the, say, the learning resources that you had prepared while you were with your former employer. So that would normally be a breach of copyright, because there is a distinction usually between intellectual property and copyright. Universities tend to be pretty good in terms of, say, if you write a book, for example, they don't usually ask you for a share in the royalties or anything like that. So you get to keep that, and you get to take the book with you, so to speak, when you leave. But these days, certainly in the context of Australia, if you're lecturing in a university, you do produce a lot of learning materials. That always remains the property, the intellectual property of the university, unless there's some special arrangement. And most universities do make allowance for special arrangements. And that's why I say be absolutely clear, what you're actually entitled to and what the university or your employer more generally is actually entitled to hang on to. And look, this can be a big, big issue, say in a company which is developing a brand new technology or highly innovative. So the high tech companies, for example, where they're creating software and so on, there's a lot of intellectual property involved here. So it is really important that everybody knows where they stand. But look, in my experience, universities tend to be really good with the whole issue of copyright and intellectual property. The door is always open for negotiation as well. I just think you need to make sure every card is on the table and you're prepared to talk.
So let me shift it to the other way, because we're talking about us as leaders leaving an organisation and what we have the right to take. Let's shift it the other way as how can we allow someone to leave well with IP? So, for example, some of my past, and you've mentored me through a lot of my exits, good and bad. There have been times where, as I leave, my partner or whatever that I've been working with or under has kind of threatened and said, well, you're not allowed to do anything in that field or whatever. Now, obviously there are your non-compete clauses that people have in their contracts and everything like that. But how can we, because I actually felt in that time, it's like, well, I'm a coach. Like, I came in with knowledge and I came out with knowledge. Yes, I came out with some knowledge, but I also contributed knowledge, as well as it's no different from me just going to a seminar and learning knowledge and then going and reapplying. Like, that's what we do as coaches. We, coaches and teachers, we absorb information and then package it up in a presentable way to a new audience, to people that we believe that'll help. I couldn't not do that, and obviously it's my livelihood and everything like that, and I felt that was not to be petty about it, like unfair, but obviously it was. I don't feel it was godly. How do we, while still protecting ourselves, because we have we have a responsibility for ourselves, our organisation, and everything like that. How do we allow someone to leave with some IP so that we can still bless them on their way without restricting them from then pursuing, onto their future things while still protecting ourselves?
That's a pretty difficult one. And I think in a lot of cases when the departures are unhappy ones and unhealthy ones, it's because, in a sense, rules have been made up as we go. And I know, we don't want to speak about specific cases, but I do know of cases where there wasn't a proper agreement in place right from the outset that actually made it quite explicit about how intellectual property was going to be handled. In a business such as your own, where you're involved in mentoring and coaching and training, you are your intellectual property to a large extent. So you're absorbing information and new knowledge all the time. You package it up in a unique way and then you present it. And that walks with you. So it's very difficult for, say, a partner or an employer to say you can't take that with you because it's who you are.
Yep.
I do think, on the other hand, though, that to the extent that you've created, say, learning resources, these might be videos, they might be written material, I think that stays behind.
Yep.
And that I think is a fairly clear-cut distinction. But a partner, an employer, actually doesn't own you. They don't own what's in your head. They don't own your uniqueness, which makes you successful in any particular context. And the other thing too is there needs, I believe, to be generosity on either side. And perhaps I'm talking about an ideal world because where people are hurt, they don't feel like being generous. But as Christians, we need to take a leaf out of God's book, as it were. He was most generous toward us because he sacrificed his son, Jesus Christ, so that we might not perish but have everlasting life. And in fact, that we might have a life worth living. This side of our earthly grave. And so generosity, I think, is a principle.
Not that we deserved it either.
No, that's right. We didn't deserve it. And look, I think if we can build into business culture the idea of generosity, then we can overcome a lot of these negative departures. But it's not easy because both parties have got to be willing to be generous. My own view is that if I had a breakup from a partnership in business, and I even if I knew the other person was taking intellectual property that was mine, I'm confident that God will still get me through, even if it does some damage to my business. I don't think I would be prepared to sacrifice, say, Christian love and charity and generosity in order to preserve what I perceived as something that belonged to me. Now, I don't believe we should allow ourselves to be like a doorstep, so to speak, a doormat, I should say. But I do think we should have confidence that God will look after us, no matter what 100%. The circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, and forgiveness goes a long way. And obviously in our program, we spend a lot of time talking about forgiveness, especially at the beginning with these sorts of challenges, because whether we are the one exiting or someone is leaving us, there has to be some forgiveness there, and we have to be the bigger man. But we really do. Yes. God has called us, whether it's right or not. We have to be generous. We have to be loving, we have to be caring, and like I kind of chimed in before, not because they deserve it, not because God didn't give us because we deserved it. No, he gave us anyway. He gave us Jesus, and he's always forgiven us.
That's
and
right.
so yeah, it's really important that we exercise that forgiveness. And one of the keys that I believe to forgiving someone is being able to bless someone. It kind of forces us to act out, because obviously, like James says, faith without works is dead. We can say, I'm forgiven, but unless you actually, is there going to be an act, a physical act that you're going to do that can display? Now, it doesn't mean that you're generous and you let them walk away with those resources that means your forgiveness is done. No, there's usually a lot of work still to be done.
Yeah.
But it's a beginning of it. It's like, you know what, I'm doing my part, because I believe that out of all the exits that I've had, the one thing that I can contest to, whether I contributed to the bad exit or not, I can stand here honestly, and you can hold me accountable to this, because you've been in every one of these situations. I have always held my integrity. Always make sure that I maintain my integrity with the exit. And I think that God bless it. Like you're saying, look, whether you miss out on that or whatever, like God will protect you. Yeah, like we speak about David. David could have killed Saul in that cave, but he didn't. And he said, no, it's for God to judge between you and me. It's not me to try to claim my throne or whatever. It's God will judge between you and I. So let that be a transition. Actually, unless you have something more you want to say on that, Dr. Rod?
No, I'm done.
You're done. Well, there's always more. There's always more. And I actually think that that's actually a good transition, because talking about, letting God judge between us, that sometimes when there's an exit, there's a lot of judging that's done, a lot of rumors, a lot of gossiping that happens around, that person left, those people are no longer together, and there's all these conspiracies that happen, and there's so many people judging what happened in the situation without actually knowing. And so the next point that I want to talk about is actually a car story. Yes, at the start, before we started recording, Dr. Rod turned around and goes, "Is there going to be a car story every week?" And I'm like, probably not, but quite regularly, maybe. I love my cars. That's my guilty pleasure is cars. When I want some escapism, I open up YouTube and I watch some automotive YouTube vloggers, because it's kind of my escape. I love cars. There is one channel that I follow, which is called DDE. They're called Daily Driven Exotics, and they're vloggers of supercars, and they do up supercars, and they do all these crazy things with supercars. And their the owner or the main guy on the channel is Damon Fryer. He is I would say, from what I see on the outset, from what I see his persona, is he is an alpha male. An true alpha male, with the ego and everything, the confidence and the bravado. And I mean, he's built quite a success around. He has countless supercars, and he's got one of the most successful YouTube channels. Now, he actually partnered with a guy called Dean Kearney, and from Carnage Race Drifting. He's a drift racer, an Irish drifter, and they started doing some collaborations together. They partnered on the racing team together and everything like that. And then a couple of months ago, all of a sudden, they were no longer in each other's videos. All of a sudden, no one was mentioning it. All of a sudden, they weren't tagging each other in social media posts and everything like that. And it stirred up the internet, or the supercar community anyway, of part of the internet. And it just brought forward, there was all these other things. That there's another YouTuber that called Houston Croster that also had apparently a falling out with Damon Fryer from DDE. And there was all these conspiracies and everything, but from their end, they were just silent. Like, it just went quiet. No one spoke about anything. There were a couple of things mentioned about it, but just sort of, there's people that are no longer with our organization. That's it. And then moved on. And I think it's very interesting, Dr. Rod, why is it that when there's a split, especially a public one, why is it that there's all these conspiracy theories that flow around the situation? Everyone's got their take on the situation.
Well, I think that's because conspiracies fill a vacuum. There's something about us human beings we like to know. And when we don't have all the information, we just like to close the gap. And I think this is one of the downsides of social media, as a matter of fact, that, when these things become, I guess, shared publicly, there are lots and lots of people who are more than ready to fill the gaps in knowledge. And as a result, we get what some people might call conspiracy theories. We certainly get a lot of speculation. And obviously much of it is not true because we don't know the truth. And so, I feel pretty uncomfortable reading some of this stuff on social media, as I did here, because I didn't have any idea what you were talking about when you briefed me a week or so ago. And I sat down and watched the videos. I still don't know much more than I did when I started. But I think it's pretty unfortunate that so much of this is played out in social media. But look, I've been on both sides of this issue. I've been on a board where we found it necessary to part company with the CEO. And we couldn't say very much publicly at all. And we came under a lot of criticism, but we had to keep our lips tightly zipped for legal reasons. But also I felt that to be fair to the person involved and others involved, we couldn't make any public statements at all. And that was a pretty difficult period. And of course, with social media, we got whacked a fair bit in the social media and simply had to take it. So I feel pretty sorry for the people involved in these kinds of things. But I do think what's important is that relationships are maintained. And
that's a good point.
If behind this there's a breakdown in relationship, then I really do think that it's incumbent upon all of the parties to do everything they can to repair the relationship. And we will probably never see, in public what's going on there. And I think, that goes back to the Meghan Markle issue as well. We only see all this public sparring, comments made publicly, and the media, of course, is always wanting to grab onto these. And so it is, on all forms of social media. We don't always know really what's going on in the hearts of people or what's going on behind the scenes. But if I was mentoring any of these people or advising any of these people, I would say just forget about the social media, really, because ultimately it doesn't matter. What really does matter is that if relationships are broken, then you need to do all you can to repair the relationships.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like when there's a public split, when I say public, it's something that, even just in your circle of friends is kind of public. Sometimes silence is important. Sometimes because people need to be able to, I suppose, gather themselves and refocus and re-step, even if there has been a problem. We don't need to expose everything, but so for example, and I've shared this, is that, I was partnered with Wes Hone and we were doing some great things there, and I felt the Lord move us on to be able to spend time with the family. And I just felt like radio silence was what was best in the time. There was nothing wrong. It was just, you know what? I don't want to distract from what he's doing. You do that. I'm going to be a little quiet and just build in the background. And, luckily I had this app and the program to kind of definitely, bury my head into and just use our focus. And it was just good to be quiet for a season, just to allow some breathing room, because I go back to this DDE issue and the Dean Kearney separation. They're now kind of back strong. Dean's now got his own YouTube channel and he's now vlogging regularly and everything like that. So it just seemed like they just needed that little bit of breathing space to kind of gather, what does it look like by myself, and what is it, and then kind of come back. And so sometimes silence is silence is sometimes really important for us to do. The other thing I wanted to kind of mention with it is just because there's silence doesn't mean there was a problem. So
no, it doesn't. And I think this gets back to that comment I made earlier about conspiracy theory, gossip, and so on, filling the vacuum.
Yeah.
A lot of the time it's none of our business what's happening. So, in the case of you, as it were, having radio silence for a while, well, what business is it even of mine if that's the case? And we just need to be so careful that we don't fill in the gap or say, well, there must have been something terrible happen between them, when in fact there was really a transition going on to a different set of circumstances. So, the Bible doesn't like gossip.
Yes.
We're strongly discouraged from being gossipers, because that's one of the things that keeps people out of heaven, Not once we're saved, of course, that's a different issue. But, it's on the same level as, say, sexual sin, as far as the Bible is concerned. And look, as Christians, we should refrain from gossiping. So let's not try to fill in the gaps of knowledge where something has become, something public. The only qualification I would make, Craig, is that when people seek to be public figures, and on social media you can actually nominate yourself as a public figure, then I think you do have some level of responsibility to the public. So we just need to balance that a little bit as well. When you say, I'm a public figure, you're benefiting from the number of followers that you have because you're getting more through advertising and so on and so forth, then to some extent they've become stakeholders.
100%.
And stakeholders do need to have something. So we've just got to balance that a little bit. I tend to go on the side of privacy on the part of the individuals, but where you've really cultivated the public as a public figure, then they are stakeholders, and stakeholders are owed some duty in this regard.
I 100% agree with that, and that's actually a perfect transition into our next topic of someone exiting so well. And once again, I really, really, really want to emphasize that we are not judging anyone for these situations. We don't know the whole circumstances. However, we are just drawing some metaphors and some lessons we from an outsider's point of view we can see. But talking about being public figures and what we share to the public, let's talk about Brian Houston, Pastor Brian Houston. Now, it breaks my heart to see what he and his family and Bobby has gone through in the recent months and years and everything like that. And look, once again, we don't know the real stories. We don't know everything that's going on. But there was something a number of months ago that really surprised me. And as soon as I saw it, I actually spoke to you the next week, Dr. Rod, about that. I'm like, I just don't get this action. Now, we know that he's now stepped back from Hillsong, which must be so heartbreaking to have to step back from an organization that you have founded and seen grow across the planet. But there was one situation with this that now I don't actually spend much time on social media, but I opened up my Instagram one day to go on. I think someone messaged me, and I went to open up. And the first message was a post by Pastor Brian Houston with a screenshot of a communication between one of his board members and his wife, Pastor Bobby Houston, about her being, let go from her position there, and then his response. Now, I don't want to talk about the situation because we don't know it, but I want to talk about that act. Because that, for me, I turned around instantly to my wife, Noelia, and I said, that is poor leadership. That is bad, airing your dirty laundry. Now, even if there is a problem, we need to be responsible and deal with it behind closed doors. Yes, I agree with you, Dr. Roman. I want to get to this in a moment about like what we do need to share public. We have to. But there's certain things we need to keep in private. There's certain things that, because as soon as he did that, my heart sank for the church. And when I say the church, I mean the Christian church as a whole across the nation. Because Hillsong are our flagship almost. Like they're pioneers and they're at the forefront. And for their leader to make such a poor decision and a poor public decision to air their dirty laundry, it just paints a bad light against the church as a whole. What was your response to that situation?
Oh dear, this is a tough one. I don't know Brian personally, but I have been at conferences that he's attended and so on. And he just related to people so very well. So my heart really goes out to him, but also to everybody in Hillsong Church, which has had some pretty tough times of late. Things have not gone well for Hillsong in a number of areas. My own view is that it really stems from an issue which we call in the literature span of control. And I think actually Brian's leadership was spread too thinly.
Okay.
And look, I know this is a big issue for senior pastors. And look, the same happens in the corporate world as well. Leaders have to get to the point where they are prepared to take the risk to delegate. And there's a big difference between delegation and direction. When you delegate, what you're really saying is trust you in those shoes. The very first thing I did when this story broke, I actually went to the website of Australia's Commission for Not-for-Profits and Charities. It's called the ACNC here in Australia. And I had a look at all of the Hillsong entities for which there was any information available. And I saw that Brian was actually chairman of multiple boards. And my reaction was, this guy has spread himself too thinly in leadership and has really not done enough delegation. Now, my view is that all of the issues actually go back to that. And that might be too simplistic. But I think the issues go back to that span of control, which was too wide for one person to maintain. And that can lead to all sorts of things. It can lead to stress. And we know that in Brian's case, he was on medication at times. And that's all compounded, of course, in this Pentecostal world. I'm part of it, of course, where we're supposed to be more than conquerors. We're supposed to live in victory. So we tend not to tell people that we've got some issues, that we're stressed, or, we might even be depressed. We don't want to tell people that, because that may be interpreted as some kind of failure of our faith. You know what? We need to accept we're all broken. So that I think is important background. Now, in terms of what we saw on social media, I've seen most of it. I just felt, man, I'd like to get alongside this guy and just, comfort him and strengthen him, because everything I've seen in social media that he's written indicates to me someone who's hurting really, really badly. Yes. And you know what? As a leader, I hurt sometimes. And often, I would say, don't go anywhere near social media when you're really hurting badly. I don't know why people do it, honestly. And see, one of the problems, Craig, with something like, these communications have all been written.
Yeah.
So what we're doing, we're reading words. Honestly, I've always said to my staff, never use email or social media to convey how you feel. It's impossible, because, in this kind of communication, there needs to be body language. You need to be able to see the emotional state of people.
Yep.
and so on. When you just read the written word, it is so easy for the intended receiver to get it wrong. You see, because communication is not all that effective when it's by written word only. It needs to be accompanied by body language, by
tonality,
intonation of the voice. What we're doing here.
Yeah.
You see, it's very different to the written word. So, I would just counsel people, don't write it. because you can't actually convey how you feel, how you really feel about a situation. And it's very difficult to communicate your heart to people. I feel intensely sad for the whole of the Hillsong movement, and not just because of this, but there are other issues as well. But if I can say anything to leaders today, right now today, this is what I would say: don't take on too wide a span of control. You've got to trust people to take on some role. You've got to delegate. That means you've got to give some people authority and responsibility. And in my view, Brian should have headed up the church, and he shouldn't have been chairing all these boards, but he should have had maybe weekly, fortnightly, monthly meetings with the chairs of all the boards to whom he delegated. And I think they wouldn't have done the same job that he would. Sure. Those of us who are a bit perfectionists, we don't believe anybody can do as good as us. But you know what? We've got to let go. We've got to trust. And this is all part of empowering our people as leaders, because as you and I have often discussed, leadership is not just about influence, it's also about empowerment.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that answers the question, Craig, but
no, it's really good.
It's a pretty difficult situation, no doubt about it.
I really like because what you're saying is that, so what I'm talking about is that text message, right? That text message. Yeah. And then what you're saying is that was just a symptom of
absolutely
of like this deep, like you have to be very broken to get to that point to, I suppose, actually going back to one of the early points, like justifying, vindicating ourselves. He obviously felt like the only way he could justify himself by now was to go public with this negative attack, and it's sad, and I suppose for me, it reminds me of a strategy that we talk about, which is the three S's of leadership, is being able to categorize where people are in leadership. I'll go through them quickly. Obviously, we spend a whole week teaching this stuff, but first there's the spectators, right? So when Jesus was walking around, there was a big crowd of spectators that would just come to check out what he was doing. And so we as leaders will always have spectators coming and just judging and just kind of checking us out to see what we're doing. Then you've got the society, right? The society are the people that are like so, for example, the disciples, there was, about roughly 500 of them that would follow Jesus around at times or whatever, that they were this group of people that I'm bought in, like this is, I'm into this. And Jesus obviously spoke to them and communicated to them very differently. Then you've got the squad, which is the disciples. Now, they were the people that lived and ate and did absolutely everything and learned from Jesus. And Jesus spoke to all of those groups differently, right? He corrected the disciples and he was real with them, but he only spoke parables to the spectators, right? And so it's kind of like that thing of we're airing our dirty laundry to people that should be almost in our squad, but we're airing it to the spectators, and the spectators don't understand. Jesus says, I speak to them in parables because they have ears, but they just don't hear. And that's the problem. You air something where it shouldn't be aired, and people that don't understand will misinterpret it. You are giving them license, you're giving them ammunition to misinterpret something because you're only giving them one piece of the puzzle. But there's actually one last thing, and I said there's 3 S's, but there's actually a bonus S. And this is what I believe, going on to your point about where he found himself, is we need a select few of people that we can confide in. I've got my board, I've got yourself, I've got the other directors on the board, that you guys know everything about me. No one else knows all those things. I confide all my deepest, darkest, challenges with you so that you know what we're going through. Now, I don't air those problems in public because there's the right places to do it. You know, Jesus did the same. When he went to cry in the garden, who did he take with him? Peter, James, and John, his select few, you know, and so they were the ones that kind of were the select few that he took around with him everywhere. And so I think that we as leaders really missed that, especially charismatic leaders, especially in the church. We're kind of called to this larger than life, and I'm on a pedestal, not because we put ourselves on a pedestal, but because our congregations put us on pedestals, or it's kind of like the way, unfortunately, it's been had. And we, like you said, like we're put in this place of we're meant to be infallible, whereas I feel like we are more fallible and we need to be more vulnerable, but we need to be more vulnerable with the right people. Because I trust everything with you, and I know you're not going to gossip about me, and you're not going to share it with someone else. You're not going to go and, not only that is I know that you're not going to use it against me. You're going to use it for me. You're going to help me grow as a person. And I don't believe anyone can lead effectively if they don't have those select few people around them that they can confide in, genuinely and authentically. Otherwise, you get people posting dirty laundry because they're needing to prove themselves.
Look, I agree with you. I think that those principles that we see in the way Jesus conducted his ministry, they're important for all of us in leadership. We will have a fairly wide circle of people whom we influence. I mentioned the importance of empowerment before. The circle whom we empower is going to be a much smaller circle. So they will be, if I'm a CEO, they're going to be all the deputy CEOs. So your chief information officer, your chief people officer, and so on and so forth. And then we do need a few who have intimate knowledge of who we are and of our history, our experience, our aspirations. They will know what the dark side of our leadership is. That's the title of a book which is worth reading. And you mentioned actually that, the personality traits that fit you as a leader, they can be on the downside as well. So if you're a charismatic leader, that's a great thing and lots of people will want to follow you. But that can also lead to your downfall if you come to believe yourself too much,
Yes.
So yes, I do think that you need one or two people who love you dearly. And this is a really important aspect of the whole issue of neighbor love. We need to know that we have a few people who love us enough to take us aside and to tell us the truth.
Yeah.
But who also love us enough to keep our secrets, as it were. I think that's really, really important. The other thing too is we really do need to surround ourselves by people who are honest. And if I can just relate an anecdote, I was approached by someone in a congregation once to write a reference. They were about to go to court because they'd done something a bit silly, and I said to this person, now you do realise that I'm going to say in my reference what I've said to you, which was, you're an idiot. And I explained why that person was an idiot. And I wrote it in the reference. Now, as it were, he got off. He got off on the charge. But I think that was because, I'd been honest with him and he recognised it. He was an idiot. He did something which was just plain stupid. And there were perhaps some reasons in his background and so on, which I outlined in detail in the letter that I wrote to the court. But I did say, he's an idiot. I've told him, and he recognises that. And you see, I think that was one of the things that persuaded the court to just let him go, as it were, with a pretty stern warning. And look, he's an upstanding citizen now, lovely guy. He's a snake catcher, among other things, and I actually had him around to my house just the other day because we had a snake.
Not metaphorical snake catcher.
This was a
physical.
real snake. This was non-venomous, but it was a snake nevertheless, and I'd prefer not to have it in my yard. But look, you need to have people who love you enough to be open and honest with you, but you don't need too many of them.
No.
And as I said, the circle of people whom you're directly empowering, that's going to be much smaller. So that's roughly equivalent to the 12 disciples. And we know that Jesus was empowering them because he called them together and he taught them and he prayed for them. And as you say, he virtually lived with them. They traveled together, they ate together, slept together, and so on. They did life together, in other words. And so I think it is a good model. And look, if you're in an evangelical or Pentecostal church, or if you're a business entrepreneur, you own a business, you've got to be very, very careful that you don't come to believe that you are the person everyone else believes you are.
No, that's very true.
Take on that sort of full mantle of leadership without actually, laying some of it down for your own good ultimately.
We should aspire to what they believe we are, but not believe that we are that.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
So going back
what we should aspire to is to be more like Christ every day, to become more and more Christ-like.
Convicted. I forgot the Sunday school answer. Yes, you are 100% correct, Dr. Rod. 100% correct.
Well, I'm a pastor. What can you expect?
That's why you're my advisor. That's why you're here to keep me in check. So one last point on this Brian Houston situation actually goes back to kind of what you mentioned before, is when we are in the public eye, and you're 100% correct that, well, number one, we've chosen to be in the spotlight, but also the reason why we have the success we have, the influence we have or whatever, is because we're in the spotlight. So we can't shirk that when it doesn't suit us. I'm thinking about, obviously, like I said, we communicate to each of those groups differently, and we give each of those groups, we give the spectators a different bit of information to what we give the society, to what we give the squad, to what we give the select few. Obviously, not lying, but you give relevant information to each. But I was just thinking that I think that the timing of it is important as well. Obviously, we can't leave too much of a void, because then gossip ensues and conspiracies and everything like that. But I feel like maybe a mistake that Pastor Brian Houston made in this post, and obviously he realized it because he removed it soon after, is we need to share things to the public, to our audience, to the people we're leading, but we can't do it from a place. We can't do it from a place of emotion. And we can't do it because I believe that when we're sharing stuff, and if we haven't dealt with it ourselves, if we're still damaged and hurt by it, then it's going to come out in that. No matter how much we try to polish it, that hurt is going to come out in it. How do you feel that balance is to find that place of, I'm still hurting, but I need to share. How do I share something that I'm hurt by without it being without being heartless, but still without being a wreck,
Yeah, look, it's pretty tough, and it's so easy for us as observers on the sideline, of course, because we're not in the thick of it. But look, a degree of honesty is, I think, necessary and good for us. But you don't necessarily need to go beyond saying, look, I really do feel hurt because of these circumstances. So, I've given so much of my life to ABC. I'm no longer able to do that. In the case we're talking about, the partner in the whole enterprise has also now been exited. We don't know how much of her own will was involved in that, judging by some of the subsequent events. We just don't know for sure. But I think acknowledge there's hurt, acknowledge that the essential source of the hurt is that you're no longer able to continue building what you believe God gave you to build with. So I think acknowledge the fact that there is emotion involved, but be careful not to allow the emotion to determine how you behave, in the public arena. It is pretty difficult, Craig. When we're making an exit for reasons other than we believe God has called us into something different, He's moving us on towards our destiny, it's very easy then to be overwhelmed by the hurt. And in every case where I've exited from a particular situation, look, honestly, there have been mixed feelings. The blessing for me is that I believe God has always opened a door for me at the time of that exit. In the case of Brian, it was an unplanned exit, and he may have been talking about it with his board for some period of time, but it came suddenly, so there was really no time to prepare for the next phase as he moved on towards his own destiny. And then, of course, with Bobby losing her possession there, that kind of multiplies that whole sense of hurt and displacement even. So, these things are pretty difficult. And you won't actually find a chapter or a Bible verse which says, this is how you do it every time.
Yeah.
So you need also, I think, to take it to the Lord, knowing that He longs to hear us pour out our hearts. And if you're not the type of person who's totally open with God, it's actually okay to tell God you're hurting, you're disappointed. It's actually okay to raise your fists and say to God, I don't like this.
Yeah.
Because He's okay to take it.
Yeah.
He's okay. He wants you to be real with Him. And that's often, that's a bit cathartic as well. You can deal with a lot of issues by taking them to the real God with whom you have a real relationship through Jesus Christ, by the agency of the Holy Spirit who is with us. The Holy Spirit is not an idea. The Holy Spirit is not out there somewhere. The Holy Spirit is in us, with us, 24/7, and we can actually have a direct conversation. And I would really encourage folk to do that. I've done it. I've certainly let God know how I've felt about a lot of situations, that's for sure.
So we've been talking about, let's say poor exits and people not exiting properly for many reasons. Let's shift our focus to leadership lessons from Luke. Right, a little bit of a series that we're doing where we're taking some great leadership lessons from Luke, and with all this theme today of exiting and partners breaking up and all that sort of stuff, I really felt I wanted to find a solution to this problem, a biblical solution to this problem. And like you said, Dr. Rod, there's not an exact solution for this, or exact chapter and verse that says how to deal with this. But I actually felt that rather than finding the solution of how to exit well, how about we as leaders take a step back and see what our responsibility is in people exiting? And because one of the things that we can do as leaders to overcome a poor exit is releasing people. We as leaders have been called to release others. I believe that because there are times like that we've been, Dr. Rod, you just mentioned before that there's been seasons you felt like God was saying now's time to move on. And I felt that in my time. And there'll be people that God will bring into your life in a season, and it's just for a season. And then they are meant to be moved on. And I believe that our job as leaders is to help nurture and grow someone, help them to become the best person they can be while they're with us, and then knowing the right time to release someone. And so what does the Bible say about releasing people, or some leadership lessons we can gather from Luke? Well, if you look at the start of Luke, where you have the angel turn up and speak to Zechariah. Now, Zechariah was John the Baptist's father, and he was a priest, and he was doing one of the highest honors you could do in priesthood. So you would think that he's had this honor of being able to go into the Holy of Holies and everything like that. You'd think that he's a pretty significant guy. And you probably think that as a leader, he's probably thinking, yeah, I'm meant to lead some amazing people, right? But then the angel said to him, no, your job is to raise up someone who is going to pave the way for the Savior. So he was shifted from being in this leadership position that he's the important person. It's like, no, it's his responsibility now to release, John the Baptist into his calling. And then obviously, as we know later on, John was there not to be the leader, but to pave the way to then release Jesus into his ministry as well. So I think that probably the anecdote to Paul exiting is going, well, hang on, rather than thinking about trying to, I suppose, how can we keep everyone to ourselves, and how can we like that scarcity mindset of keeping them to ourselves, how can we shift that mindset and be aware of those situations as leaders of when the right time is to release people around them, and know that our job is not to gather and store up for ourselves all these people under ourselves, but to raise people up and release them. Dr. Rod, obviously you've probably got some wisdom around those passages in the Bible, but also how do you find that right time to release someone?
Well, again, none of these things are easy, but just like Zechariah did, you've got to hear from God. I think, ultimately understand that if you're a pastor in charge of a church, or a CEO running a business, or you're an entrepreneur who owns a business, you really need to figure out what is my destiny? Where do I fit in God's scheme of things? Because when you're fairly comfortable there, you can do anything God asks you to do, even if it does mean releasing somebody so that they might fulfill their destiny. I think it does make it easier if you understand that God is your provider. So it's not that indispensable employee or indispensable colleague or partner. They're not actually indispensable. And that, ultimately God is the one who provides for you, and God is the one who protects you. I think that's important to understand. But look at Jesus' baptism. This is really interesting because he submitted to baptism to someone who was actually inferior to him, because John the Baptist was no deity. He was fully human. But John the Baptist recognized that Jesus had a particular destiny. Now, that might not have been well defined for him at the time. So he might not have fully understood what it was all about. But those words he said, he must increase and I must decrease, I think sums up the situation very well. And sometimes when we release an employee, a colleague, or a partner, they will go on to do greater things temporarily than us. They might become more famous. They might run a more profitable business. They might end up with more money and power than we do in this life. But that's not the end of the game, of course, because we all should have our eye on eternity. So there are some lessons we can draw from those, what's recorded of the life of Jesus and John the Baptist in the book of Luke. I think perhaps the most important lesson is we've got to hear from God. We've really got to know. And see, when Jesus was baptized, that's I believe I'm correct in saying this. This is the only instance in the Bible where God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost were revealed at the same time.
Wow. Yes, of course.
And that was when, God spoke, the Holy Spirit alighted, and Jesus Christ came up out of the waters. And that was really when Jesus was commissioned to do what he had been sent, or what he volunteered to come to earth and live as a man among men. That was really when he was commissioned.
He was released into his purpose.
That's right. And John the Baptist, he was commissioned and released earlier. And, he's called John the Baptist for a reason.
Yeah.
And, he was baptizing people, and baptism then, it's a little bit different now for the New Testament church, but baptism then was actually a signal of giving up one citizenship and taking on another form of citizenship, and was repenting of the old ways essentially, and moving on to a new life. So yes, there are some lessons there. As leaders, we need to be able to release people well. I believe that it's important that we release people with our blessing, even if we might not really want to see them go, because I think that makes room for God to bless us. And I feel quite sad, when people leave the church, and of course we've had that experience ourselves when people just stop coming to church. You follow them up, and they say, "Well, I don't really like what you're teaching," or you don't have a well enough developed kids ministry or youth ministry or whatever. I believe the right way is we sit down, we have a talk. Look, if somebody doesn't like the way I preach, I can live with that. They can say, look, we need to go to a church where things are taught in a different way, or to a church where they've got a much better ministry to youth because we've got teenagers. I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And then what I want to do as a pastor is to say, well, let's work out what your last Sunday in church, what that date will be, and we want to honour you. And look, when people have done that for us, it's just been so good. We had a young couple who were moving away. They were just moving away. They weren't dissatisfied, but they were about to have a baby. So we presented them with a family Bible, and we were actually able to release them. We join our hearts, and everybody was able to say goodbye. I've been involved in other situations where we were actually leaving a church, believing God had taken us on to something different. And, the pastor said, well, we don't really want you to have anything to do with anybody after you leave. And we made a commitment that we wouldn't do so for a certain period of time. And we held to that. But you know what? There are people who were really hurt by that because they thought that we didn't like them anymore, that we had an issue with them. And there's one couple in particular who were very, very badly hurt. They don't even go to church anymore. So, we just got to get that release thing right on both sides.
Yeah, look, we've all, I'm sure everyone who's watching has experienced a situation like that where they've exited, been told to keep quiet about it and not talk to anyone, and people just get hurt even more. And that's part of the driving force of On Purpose Cubed, trying to eradicate poor leadership by raising up the next generation of influential leaders.
If I can share an anecdote, Craig, there was some years ago, we moved house, so we moved out of the city into one of the dormitory suburbs, and we decided we'd go to a local church. So we left. I talked with the minister. We left that church. We started going to a church which was literally in our neighbourhood, and I do strongly believe that we should be in a church which is in our neighbourhood if we possibly can be.
Yeah.
Now, it was the policy of that church never to talk about you after you left. And I happened to run into someone from that church at a combined churches event in that city, and this person said to me, "Oh, are you and your wife still married?" and I said, "Well, yeah, last time I looked at my credit card, we were." So yeah, look, I think it's really important that we, maintain our connections and don't just, as it were, write people off when they leave. And it's just so easy to get hurt in these kinds of exits. We just don't get hurt. Make that your motto. I'm not going to get hurt in an exit, whether I'm the person exiting or the person who's perhaps engineering the exit of somebody else. Let's do everything we can not to be hurt, and understand that ultimately it's God who is our provider, not the person who's exiting. And the person who's exiting needs to understand that as well, that it's not your employer, the pastor or whoever who's your provider. Actually, God takes on that responsibility.
Yeah. I think the lesson we can learn from this is, I think we as leaders, look, obviously when we exit and there is a leader that we are serving under and we're exiting under their terms, unfortunately we're at the whim of their desires, and we need to hold integrity to that. And unfortunately, there's going to be some bad situations. But how about we as leaders make sure that we don't do that to other people, and make sure that we release people well. We look for opportunities to release people. I'm going to finish on one quick anecdote. Is there's been one time that I can say that there has been one leader, and he probably wouldn't even consider himself as a leader. He probably wouldn't consider himself that influential. But whenever I consider this situation about exiting well, I feel like he's the one person that truly, truly released me well, with excellence. And it was when he actually introduced me to coaching. He taught me how to be a business coach. We partnered together at the start for my first year of coaching. And then at the end of my first year of coaching, I was very big into online stuff, even back then, going back 11 years ago. It's funny that now I've created so much stuff online, but back then I was so interested with creating online programs and everything like that. And it just wasn't his style. And it was just, at the end of the first year, I remember he pulled me in, he said, "Craig, I'm holding you back. Like, that's not my style. Like, I'm doing the one-on-ones and I'm doing in-person stuff. Like, I'm not interested in that online stuff. Like, I want to release you." And so he released me from our agreement and our contracts and everything like that. And he's like, no, I want to bless you. And he blessed me on the way out. And he contributed as much as he could on the way out. And he taught me to be a business coach. And he was absolutely incredible. He had no need. He could have made plenty of money from me and all the stuff that I was doing and everything like that. But he saw that, no, I need to release this person. And I've got to give him, actually, I'm going to say his name, Nathan McDonald. That's right, from Black Belt Business, Nathan McDonald. I've got to give you props. If you know of him or tag him or whatever, like send him some love. He deserves a lot for that, because he actually released me. And now look, 10 plus years later, he released me, and I've traveled the world. I've spoken and coached people all over the world. I've had some incredible experiences because he released me. And he actually saw the opportunity and said, no, I need to release you. There wasn't any animosity, and there wasn't any begrudging, and he actually saw it early and released me early. So I would hope that the people that I lead could say those things about me. And I think that I want to encourage you as a leader to have look for those opportunities, because yes, they may no longer be able to help you do your chairs ministry. They may not be able to help you on your door anymore or anything like that, or even on your worship team or anything like that. You may release them to another church or whatever, but you were a crucial part of that person's growth and development, and an even greater influence on releasing them. There is actually more influence in releasing someone at the right time than there is at trying to keep them so you can continue to influence them. So that's my encouragement to you. So guys, let's wrap it up there. It's been incredible to be able to share with you, and Dr. Rod, thank you for your time. Dr. Rod, one closing thought about how we exit well or how we release well.
Do it with joy in your heart. We've had the experience of releasing our own daughter and son-in-law and two little granddaughters who built the church with us. They were key on our worship team, and our son-in-law was offered a job in the United States. So they moved country. They're very happy there. We miss them heaps, of course. But, that principle is always there. We, despite the fact that we knew they were going to leave a big hole in the church, they were going to leave a big hole in our lives as well, we released them with genuine joy in our hearts because we knew that that would be a blessing, for them. For them to know that they were leaving with our blessing because we could see what God had, or something of what God had in store for them, and just firm in our knowledge that, God was going to look after the church. And look, we're still struggling in some ways in the church, but we still have confidence that, God will provide. And we are absolutely delighted to see how happy our family in America is, Yep. And it brings us a lot of joy, even though we miss them so much. It brings us a lot of joy. And so I just absolutely encourage people, do it with joy, genuine joy. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Cultivate the joy of the Lord in all of these situations. And I'll tell you what, you'll enjoy your life a lot more too.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Rod. Thank you, as always, for sharing. And hey, guys, if you enjoyed this, put a comment and tell us share some of your experiences of being released well, or some of the challenges that you've been able to overcome as well with good or bad exits. And hey, if you like it, chuck a like. And if you want to see more and learn more leadership principles from a faith-based, research-backed perspective from an incredible man like Dr. Rod and myself, please consider subscribing. It would mean the world to us. And we just hope you have a spectacular week, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you very much, Dr. Rod. See you later.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.